Well, I love to read, and I love to listen to audiobooks, especially when I'm driving. And so sometimes questions pop in my head like, how long did it take this narrator to read this book? And so I am so thankful to have Maddie Argyropoulos with me today. She is a managing producer at Macmillan Audio, and she's going to answer some of these questions for me. So, Maddie, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you. How is it over there?
We're good. We're finally getting some warm weather. So,
oh, you're so lucky. It's raining in New York.
Well, it is cloudy here today, but it's been warming up, so it's great. We've been living in winter drab, so
It's so nice to meet you.
Yes, and sorry for the Minnesota accent. I know I have a big one.
I can't even apologize for what I assume is a Bronx accent, but I don't really know.
Yeah, so I love listening to audiobooks. I listen to them in my car. I listen to them when I'm at home. I just love them. And so I've always just had some questions. And so how do you go about choosing a narrator for a book?
So it's a collaborative process between the author, the producer, sometimes marketing, and we sort of like approach each book as if it's its own special art form and its own like autonomous book that, let's pretend audiobooks were never invented. We're going to like sort of go into it like brand new. But saying that, like there are often series narrators that we already have established and have their own fan bases, and the author has a great relationship with them. So we definitely want to encourage those kinds of like listeners to engage again with the same series narrator.
Yes, I have been listening to Linda Castillo's books, and I love Kathleen McInerney's narration. She's awesome, and in the Kate Burkholder series. So, yes.
Yeah, and Linda herself, she really is in tune with her fan base, and she definitely cares that, like, you know, that Kathleen is the voice of Kate Burkholder, and they have a great relationship. Like I've produced a couple of books for the Kate Burkholder series, and they're always wonderful to work on. And Kathleen knows that character and those books so well that you can't imagine that anybody else could do those voices. For the Louise Penny books, I don't know if you've ever listened to those. For a long time, there was a series narrator that was completely beloved by the audience, and he sadly had passed away. And Louise Penny and Macmillan Audio spent about a year finding the perfect replacement voice. Not that anybody could ever replace Ralph Cosham, but we found Robert Bathurst after like going through audition after audition, and I think the audience did embrace him. It was a little bumpy at first because you're like, no, it's not Ralph, but now he, you know, last year he won Best Male Narration for that series. So like, yes, we love our series narrators, but sometimes you have to move on, and you have to like choose a new voice, and that's very challenging. And the author is definitely they are gonna really participate in the process of casting.
Another narrator I really like is Therese Plummer. Have you ever worked with her?
Yeah, of course. We love Therese Plummer. She's reading a book for Macmillan, which is the 40th anniversary of Housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson. It should be out in the fall.
And so how much research and pre-production goes into the narrator, or how much does the narrator do of pre-production and research?
Again, that depends on the narrator. Some like to be over-prepared. Some are like, please help me. Like, I need to know the pronunciation of this. And can you ask the author? I have some narrators who have so much like educational background, and like they love the research and to like jump into the accent, that they're just like, I think I got this. But often you want to like help them to do the pre-production, and you want to be like, well, for example, like, how do you pronounce these certain lakes in Michigan or in Detroit or whatever? And like, is this how you, and so I'll call up a library and be like, hey, you know that lake down by you, how would you say that name? And then they're like, what is this for? I'm like, well, we're recording an audiobook in New York, and we're not sure if it's like Munson or Monsoon Lake, or Nottage or Notage. So Yeah, they do a lot of research, and the author helps because, of course, in their minds, they know how they want their characters' names to be pronounced, and so it's very collaborative because in their heads they're like, oh, I actually didn't imagine this being spoken out loud. This was like, it's a sci-fi fantasy novel. I just wrote it. I didn't necessarily like have, an opinion about how it should be pronounced. So it's definitely like talk to each other, but also sort of ground yourself in reality, depending on the book.
Well, if you ever need help speaking Minnesotan, I'm really good at it.
I'm always looking for local references for sure. I would love that.
So how does the process work? Does the narrator, read the book from start to finish? Do their characters all at one time, or do they as they're reading, they switch back and forth? How does that work?
So a very well-prepped narrator will probably go through this, well, we call it the script, but it's really the text. They'll go through it at least 2 times before they even step into the booth. So they've sort of like made notations for themselves. We have this wonderful actor, Mark Thompson. He makes voice references for himself as he's reading. And it depends. You can do it like with voice, or you can do it just like with marking like what you already know, the actor's like sort of shorthand. So they can be like, oh, this is my Dumbledore voice, or this is my Superman voice, so they can just sort of make that notation. So it actually, like, they're so talented. They do just go through it. And in a dialogue, they're just doing it one after another. They're not really like pausing. I'm going to do, just dad here, and then I can do, cousin Brian here. They're seamlessly doing it as you would if you were like telling a story. You were just like, oh, and then he said to me, voice, and then she, came back in, voice. But they're so practiced, and they have so much, background in this performing, that they can just seem like it's amazing. Actually, it really is. But prep helps. Prep definitely helps. I have this one narrator who reads the Marissa Meyer and Stephanie Garber series, Rebecca Soler, and she preps 3 times. Her entire scripts are color coded. She marks where her breaths are supposed to be, so that like she's like, oh, this is an intense sentence. I'm probably going to stumble over this, so like I should probably breathe here. Like there is a lot that goes into like preparation before you sit down and hit record.
Wow. Yeah. that is amazing. Cause I think about it, I'm like, I would find that so hard to just reading with my kids, their children's books, and I try to do a character and I'm like, oh, how did I do that again? Yeah.
It's very funny sort of bloopers in the studio. If they're like, oh, come back here, she said quietly. Oh, I better say that quietly. So they sort of like, sometimes if you get too ahead of yourself in the character voice, you forget to like acknowledge the attribution and the description of how to perform it. But usually, you just go back and like, oh, I better, that didn't sound gravelly at all. And just said, I should say that, with a little gravel in the voice. So it's there are like visual cues, and then there's just the character and maintaining consistency. And that's where the collaboration comes in, where like if they do think they might have trouble, there's an engineer there being like, oh, this is how you sounded on page 25 for this like, garbage truck driver that you didn't remember was going to show up in chapter 5. So like we have that voice for you. So there's like a lot of tools you can like help them with, but often they are so prepared when they get into the booth.
And how long does it take to do a book? Let's use a Linda Castillo book, for example. How long would it take to record that?
So, right. Good. It's good that you were very specific because each book is different. I would say a Linda Castillo book probably, and we're talking about production. So we're eliminating pre-production and post. So for Kathleen to sit down and record, I would say if I don't want to like pressure her, I want to give her, make sure, get that full hour for lunch. We want to give her about 4 days, probably for like your standard Linda Castillo book. I think a good sort of like, depending on the way the density of the page is, you can sort of get about 100 pages read in a day. But that's tough. It's tough on your voice, and that's why there there are so many things to admire about these narrators, especially this sort of meditative, like working the tool all day and keeping consistent. So, as long as they're healthy and the audio is sort of consistent throughout, you can probably do about 100 pages a day.
And is that like 4 days in a row, or do you kind of do every other day, or is it one day a week? How does that work?
I think the general narrator consensus has been like, I like to stay in the story, so I like to do it straight through. So if there's something where they're like, oh, this is really tough and like I need to take a break from it, then you can put a weekend in there. But I find that like strictly with fiction and like narrative stories, they want to stay in that zone. They want to stay with the story. And, and who knows, they have other books, they keep very busy. They're like, oh, wait, I was just in Narnia and now I have to come back to Michigan. And so like you want to give them as much help as you can with keeping them focused and,
Nice. So that's a good reference there. Come back to Michigan. Oh dear. So what is your, like, what exactly do you do as the producer? What are some of your roles?
Sure. So the very first part of my role is to imagine on my own who I think should be the reader. Before I approach the author, I want to go through the book. I want to go through like the author's past. Perhaps they're a debut author and they haven't recorded an audiobook before. And maybe, they don't necessarily know about our world, or they're an author we've had for a long time. So they're just like Brad Belzer, for example, who does the Lincoln Conspiracy. He always wants Scott Brick to do his books. So even nonfiction, even his nonfiction ones. So you're just like, oh, okay. So we go through the history of the titles, we go through the history of the author, and you're like, of course, Scott Brick should read your book. And if you have another idea, let us know. But also, here's maybe some other narrators you could for different. But you want to be like, I know about your book. I know about the history of your book. And for debut authors, you go into it thinking like, who is the strongest person to read this book? So my job begins with casting in my mind who I think would be the best reader, and then proposing it to the author. Here are 3 auditions. This is why I think that they would be amazing at this. Let me know if you have a preference. Let me know if, like, sometimes they're like, oh, my friend is an actor and she would be great for this book. Can we audition? And so it begins the collaborative process.
And so do you just kind of put out, is it like a casting call? Is that how that works?
Not necessarily. It's a bit more specific than that. But yeah, it's not like on Twitter, I need a voice for this. It's usually somebody, unless we really want an unknown to sort of like take it on, it's usually like me searching and sort of like pinpointing and be like, and directly contacting either their agent or the actor being, can you submit an audition for this? And I think you would be the perfect person for this. So a lot of it's sort of like internal deciding rather than like, hello nation, please send me your favorite voice. Like that, because that would be like 1,000 people. And of course those 1,000 people would be great. But, are they trained for this? Have they done this work before? Is it, because some actors do not take to this world very easily. They find it like physically exhausting, or, they want to rehearse more. So they want it to be like just so when you're like, this is storytelling, you have to actually like, it has to be less controlled. You have to sort of like ease into the storytelling process.
So another question I had is, if there's more than one narrator, are they together in the same room or do they do it separately?
So that's a really good question. So I recorded this audiobook called Sadie by Courtney Summers a couple of years ago, and it had over 40 narrators. So wow. That one, not to give away, my production secrets, that one was not recorded all at once. But I actually acted as the other character. So when they had when I had somebody in the booth in a dialogue, I would sort of like feed them the lines. But a book that's sort of like smaller than that, we have had sort of like 3 narrators in a room going back and forth as if it's a radio play. because that's sort of like where audiobooks have their heritage and like, you know, radio plays of, you know, of old and from podcasts and stuff like that. You shouldn't think that podcasts are a new phenomenon. They definitely came from radio play. So yeah, like I'm recording now The Night Swim by Megan Golden, and there's 3 narrators on that. And it's 3 separate points of view. They don't interact with each other. They interact in certain points, but it doesn't take you out of the story. So I have 3 narrators. They're recording it on their own, but they all have audio references of how the other person is performing it. So they do have tools to help them. So even though they're not in the same room together, which sometimes is impossible, especially now, it's just like, you really shouldn't be in the same room together. They do have ways of communicating with each other the way the story is going. So.
We were talking a little bit beforehand about your nonfiction is kind of almost a different beast of the way your production works. So how does that work differently than a fictional book?
When we come to nonfiction, it's a different beast because you have to decide if the author should read it themselves. And often these authors are not actors. They haven't trained. They didn't go to acting school. Breathing exercises. You know, there's like, when you're in the booth, sometimes you find that you have a weird burping thing happening because you haven't learned and you're, you know, at Juilliard or wherever to like regulate the flow of your breath. And you find that like sometimes authors are in there and they get really dry and they don't know the tricks of the trade. So you're sort of like in nonfiction, once you've decided if it should be the author, then it's a different process. Then it's just like, have you read out loud before? Have you sort of practiced your book? Are you so sick of your book that you can't look at it? And then when you're in the booth, you're like, oh my God, I forgot that I wrote this, which has happened. And so with nonfiction, that can also incorporate memoir. And for memoir, it's so valuable to have the author read it themselves, to hear a person's book in their own voice. And it sort of makes it more present. Like, for example, we did Tegan and Sarah's memoir, High School, and they read it themselves, and they also incorporated into it songs they had written in high school. So it makes the audiobook sort of so much more unique and special that, like, it brings a little bit more than the text has. So you can sort of make it a little bit different from the text, so the listener can have an even more bespoke experience, you know?
And you were saying that you don't always record it chronologically either, right?
Yeah, you can sort of skip over things that have powerful emotional responses in authors, but they're like, I can't do this at the end of the day. I'm going to take a break here. I'm going to, like, maybe on a different day, we're going to come back to this and then I can get through it. So yeah, so you sort of, in nonfiction and memoir, you sort of have to move around what you know as like just clear fiction production.
So now that the narrator has finished, you know, their process, what is the post-production like, and how do you organize all of this?
So you sort of organize as you go. So it really starts with production. Like there's a map that's created while you're recording that completely confounds musical producers. They're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, so this is so a narrator is reading straight through, and every time they make a stumble, you have to check it and you have to make sure that everything is labeled. I know this is interesting for you because you're a video editor.
Yes.
So you sort of you have what's called an engineer's script, and the engineer's script is actually what the audio is. If you look at the engineer's script, the audio should tell you exactly what you see. It should tell you, oh, the narrator stumbled 3 times here, and there's a noise here that you should look out for, and this is the track you can find that on, and this is the pickup, which is like when they make an error, this is where you'll find that pickup. So the engineer's script acts as your sort of like organizing force for post-production.
And is somebody, you know, sitting in the room and making notations while that's happening?
Yes, definitely. And the engineer can do that, or the producer can do that. But yeah, somebody should do that.
How many people are involved in a recording, like when they're actually recording?
During production, you can have about 3 people in the room. If they need more than that, it sort of gets a little a little crowded. But 3, you have a director, you have your engineer, and you have your talent. So, and the producer can also double as the director. And also I've doubled as the engineer as well. So it can be, down to 2. Like I've recorded, poets, which poetry is a very intimate thing. It's just like, just one-on-one, me and you, just talk you through it. Feelings are hard. But it's about a 3-person team usually.
And about how long does it take to do post-production on a recording?
So it always depends. So we did Alicia Keys's More Myself, which was a very complicated production. And it involved her reading her own book, and she also composed musical riffs throughout. And she had family members and celebrities appear in pieces of it. So I would probably give that. Actually, I'm not sure I can give a time frame on that, because it so depends, because you can sort of edit as you receive audio. So I would probably say you could probably edit that and mix and master in a month. But for sort of your easy the greatest productions that are oh, of course, you're the narrator and you know these books and we're going to put this music here and that music there. I would say if I don't want to give my editor a hard time, I would give them 2 weeks and they'd be like, oh, no problem. But these can be edited, at the last minute if you really sort of please, as they're recording it, I need you to edit this because, we're publishing simultaneously with the book. And, so it's sort of unique in that you can sort of ask favors, but also understand that 2 weeks is a totally reasonable amount to ask.
Oh, that's pretty impressive.
I think so.
One thing I guess I never thought of is that there are awards for that.
There are audio awards. They're by the Audio Publishers Association, and I've been nominated for a Grammy 3 times.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. It's I like to tell I'm a 3-time Grammy loser. So, but one day.
And so how, did you go to school to do this, or how do you get into this world?
People do ask me that. I have a background in literature and I have a master's in art history, and I learned this on the job. I just said yes to everything, and I showed up, and one day I was the front desk coffee girl for a studio, and the director comes out and it's I hate my engineer. Can't you just learn how to do this? And I'm like, yes, I can. So I put myself through grad school. I learned how to engineer, and I was and then they were like, oh, I hate my producer. Can't you just learn how to do this? I'm like, of course I can. So it's just figuring out and really seeing that this is the industry that sort of fuses my technical ability and my interest in literature and my interest in art and creativity. It's a really specific thing that we do, it's so niche, but it's very rewarding once you get into it.
So Maddie, what are some other things that you've got coming up that you're excited about?
There's so many things that I've been working on that a month goes by and you're like, oh yeah, I recorded that really exciting thing. I just produced a wonderful book by Byron Lane called A Star is Bored. And it's sort of a fictionalized account of him being Carrie Fisher's assistant. And Noah Galvin does the narration, and he's wonderful in it. I'm also producing Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, and that should be a really cool YA sort of unusual book. And I'm really excited to get that into the world. There are just so many things that are so exciting in the book world right now, and I hope that people give it a chance. And if they can't sort of read at this time, that maybe they can have somebody tell them a story, Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey or The Mountains Wild by Sarah Stewart Taylor. They're all great stories, and just give them a listen. I think you'll really enjoy them.
I just find all of this so fascinating. Thank you so much for doing this and answering these questions. And I love audiobooks. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun. Take care.
Thank you, Maddie. And we also want to thank Macmillan Audio. They are giving away copies of Linda Castillo's new book, Outsider. 10 lucky TV3 viewers will win an audiobook copy. To enter the sweepstakes, follow the link below or go to Macmillan Audio's Facebook page and follow the instructions. And here at TV3, we will also be sharing that on our Facebook page as well. Good luck and happy listening!